Now we'll be starting question number 4, and this question is related to accounting ratios. The question says Carlos owns a business selling computer equipment and he provided the following information for the year ended 31st July 2020. And we have sales, cost of sales, operating expenses, drawings and capital employed. Very good. Now the requirement says part A. Calculate the profit for the year ended 31st of July 2020. As you can see that we have a space for working, so you will show your workings, or if you want to write the formula you can show that over here, and then the final answer will be written in this column in this space, and you have the profit for last year. Right now, why is this figure given to you? This is because you will be asked to interpret the results, right? What was it last year, how has it improved, or whether it has declined or deteriorated in the current year, right? So how do we calculate profit? We know that we take the sales, we subtract the cost of sales, then we have the gross profit, but in this question we are asked to calculate the net profit, the final profit for the year. So from gross profit, that is sales less cost of sales, we will further subtract the operating expenses, and then we will have our final profit for the year. So sales is 240,000, less cost of sales are 169,000, and less operating expenses amounting to 55,000, right? These three figures we will be using to calculate profit. And the answer of this will be $16,000, right? So last year the profit was 11,550. Now it has increased to 16,000, which is good. Let's move to part B now. Part B says calculate the following ratios correct to 2 decimal places, right? Correct to 2 decimal places. So first one is profit margin. Now how do we calculate profit margin? We take the profit that we have just calculated, 16,000, and we divide it by the sales, total sales for the current year, and then it is multiplied by 100, so that we have our answer in percentage form. So profit is 16,000, and we will be dividing it with the sales. The sales are $240,000. So 16,000 divided by 240 multiplied by 100, we will have, so the answer is 6.666666. Okay, so 6.66 and so on, but you have to round this off to 2 decimal place, so that will become 6.67%, right? And it has reduced as compared to last year, right? So this is not a very good sign. Then we are asked to calculate the gross margin. So gross margin is gross profit upon sales multiplied by 100, right? Now do we have the gross profit? We are not given with the gross profit, but we can easily find that out, and that would be sales less cost of sales will give us our gross profit. So 240,000 less 169,000 divided by the sales, again 240, and then multiplied by 100. So that would be, the answer is 29.583333 and so on, but your final answer will be according to the 2 decimal place rule, so that would be 29.58%, and it has also reduced as compared to last year. Now lastly, we are asked to calculate the return on capital employed. Now what is the formula? We take the profit for the year, right? It is usually called the profit before interest and tax, and we divide it by capital employed, then again multiplied by 100. Now in this question you are given with the capital employed figure, and that is 62,000, and we have the profit as well, which is 16,000. But if you are not given with the capital employed, so there are certain formulas which you can use to find that out, right? Let me just quickly tell you that as well. So you can calculate capital employed using these formulas if you have the scattered information. If you are given with the total assets and current liabilities, so you can take the difference and then you will have your capital employed. Or if you are given with total assets and total liabilities and long term loans separately, so you will be using this formula, that is total assets less total liabilities plus long term loans. Sometimes in place of total assets and total liabilities you are given with these terms as well. So owner's equity, net assets or capital mean the same thing, that is total assets less total liabilities. So don't get confused. You can easily use these figures and add long term loans, so that will again give you capital employed. But in this question we are already given with the capital employed figure, and that is 62,000. So we will be using that only. The profit is $16,000 and the capital employed is 62,000. So multiply by 100, that would be 25.80645,161. So round it off and that would become 25.81%, right? So as we can see in all of these ratios that in the current year, Carlos' business hasn't performed really well, as all the ratios have fallen as compared to last year performance, right? So this was part B. Let's move to the next part. Part C says, comment on the performance of Carlos' business over the 2 years 2019 and 2020, right? So how we can comment on the performance? This is for 6 marks and we have a lot of lines. So we know that we'll be using these formulas to comment on the performance. First of all, first point is that all of these are decreasing, right? So a not very good performance in the current year. Now you don't have to just write that the ratios have been decreasing, it has fallen from this to this. Of course you have to write that for each of these ratios separately, but you also have to give the reasons. For instance, if we start from gross profit, right? So we know that how is gross profit calculated? We use sales and we use cost of sales to calculate gross profit, right? Now use these components to comment on the performance of Carlos' business, right? You can say that since GP margin has fallen in the current year, what could be the reasons behind that? For instance, cost of sales must have risen in the current year. Carlos did not get any trade discounts this year, or the purchase prices of inventory might have increased in the current year, which has led to a fall in gross profit. Or you can also say that sales might have fallen, selling price must have fallen, which has resulted in a falling gross profit and a falling GP margin as well. I'll be showing you the full answer as well, but let's brainstorm right now. And then next we have the profit margin, right? Now how do we calculate profit margin? From gross profit we subtract other expenses and then we'll have our profit for the year. Now what we can say about operating expenses? We have already talked about GP margin and the reason why this percentage must have fallen. Now you have to talk about operating expenses, right? So you can say that they must have risen in the current year because the profit margin is falling again as compared to last year. So there might be poor control over the expenses in the current year of Carlos' business, right? He is not exercising a better control, or you can also say that he is not increasing his sales as compared to an increase in his operating expenses in the current year, right? Which has led to a fall in the profit margin. And then lastly, you have to talk about the return on capital employed formula, right? We have already talked about both of the profits. Now you have to talk about capital employed. Now capital consists of your assets and your liabilities. So you will say that since the return on capital employed has also fallen as compared to last year, so what could be the reasons behind that? For instance, the business is employing so many assets and not utilizing it properly, right? Assets are not being utilized properly, right, which has led to an increase in capital employed, right? If the denominator is more than the numerator, the ratio will fall. Or you can also say that there are more liabilities in the business, in Carlos' business, which are not being paid off, and due to which the capital employed might have increased, which has led to a fall in return on capital employed. So overall, he is not utilizing his resources effectively and efficiently. Right, now let's see how we can write all of this in the answer space given to us. Okay, so we can write all of this as, from the ratios it is evident, right? What it is showing that Carlos' business performance has deteriorated over the 2 years because all the ratios are falling, right? Now firstly we will be talking about GP margin. The GP margin has fallen from 34.26% to 29.58. As we can see over here that last year it was 34.26, now it is 29.58%. Then what could be the reason behind it, right? Now in O levels we are not given with the background of the business, right? Whether there was a price increase or whether the cost of sales must have risen, etc., etc. So you have to think about the reasons by looking at the performance of the business, right? Whether the ratios are increasing or decreasing. If the ratio is decreasing, so there might be a fall in the selling price, right? Sales decrease, your GP will decrease. Or another component of the gross profit is the cost of sales. So it is also possible that the cost of sales must have risen. So how we can say this? We can say that this might be due to a fall in selling price, right? I am just suggesting this, that I think this must have happened, or an increase in cost of sales in the current year. Perhaps Carlos couldn't negotiate any trade discounts with the suppliers. So if there were no trade discounts, the cost of my inventory would be more, which has led to an increase in cost of sales and a fall in gross profit. Now, how you can link this to your net profit margin? You can say that this has also affected the net profit margin, as it is reduced to 6.67% from 8.56. So last year it was 8.56, now it is 6.67%. Now the first reason is because the GP is reducing, your profit margin is also falling. And you can also write another reason, that another possibility, right? Another possibility for this could be poor control over operational expenses. Perhaps Carlos is finding it difficult to increase revenue in line with the increase in expenses, right? So what am I saying? I am saying that there is a possibility that in the current year some expenses might have risen, but he couldn't increase the sales as well to overcome the increase or to match the increase in the expenses. Then lastly, we will be talking about, this was all about net profit margin, then we will talk about the gross profit margin, about the return on capital employed, that moreover a declined return on capital employed, that is rose to 25.81% from 32.08. Last year it was 32.08, now it is this. Can provide some explanation for inefficient use of resources, right? Because we use assets and liabilities to calculate capital employed. So that is either there are idle assets or high liabilities in Carlos' business, and which has increased the capital employed in the current year, due to which ROAS has been reduced. So this answer is for more than 6 marks, right? Because I wanted to explain as much as possible that I can. So you will be getting 1 mark for writing that whether the ratio has increased or decreased, but you have to write the reason as well, right? So that you get full marks for your answer, for your interpretation basically. Now let's move to part D. Part D says, Carlos is concerned that the business bank balance has shown a large decrease. So the bank balance has been reduced, the business bank balance. Now what is he considering? He is considering that either investing more cash from his private funds, right, into the business, he invests more funds from his private funds basically, or obtaining a 2-year bank loan, right? So this will do what? This will increase the capital of the business, and this will increase the liability of the business, right? So he's considering these 2 options. Now the question is, advise Carlos which option he should select. Justify your answer by providing one advantage and one disadvantage of each option. And this is for 5 marks. So for both of these options you have to write one advantage and one disadvantage, and again one advantage, one disadvantage. So this will make up for 4 marks, and then 1 mark for recommendation as well, that what do you think he should do. Okay, so let's brainstorm first. First option is if he uses his private funds. He invests more of his private funds into the business, right? So first of all, what would be the benefit? These funds doesn't have to be repaid, so this won't increase his liability, will not increase. And there will be again no interest charges to this expense as compared to if he takes the bank loan. However, these 2 were the advantages, right? Now don't you think that if he puts more money in his business, which is already showing a fall in the bank balance, the business bank balance, this will increase the risk for himself, right? Rather than using this money to invest somewhere else in some other business and then earn dividends at a much higher rate, or putting this money in a bank and earning more interest rate, he is investing this in his own business, for which he doesn't know whether it will be more profitable or not, or it will give him more return as compared to other opportunities. So this will be a drawback for using more of his funds to be invested into the business, as there are opportunity costs to this, right? Now this will be the drawback. Now let's move to the second option, which was to opt for the bank loan one. Now if he takes bank loan, this will be, of course, the liability will increase, it has to be repaid. So this is an obligation on Carlos, that he has to repay this in 2 years time. This is the drawback. But don't you think that 2 years isn't a very long period of time that he will be liable, there will be liability on his business? This doesn't seem to be a very long period of time, so this looks manageable liability. Moreover, you can also say that in this way he will be able to manage his cash flows in a better way, right? He will be knowing that when to pay the interest, how much money to be set aside for the loan repayment after 2 years. So these will be the advantages or the benefits of taking a bank loan as compared to using private funds. And then last one will be the recommendation. That is totally up to you what you have to write, which option you think would be better for Carlos right now. So let's write this down. So we can start with that the biggest advantage of investing private funds to Carlos would be that there will be no obligation to repay them, right, at a later date, which is a relief as there will be no interest charges as well. So these are the advantages. However, now the disadvantage of this option would be this will increase his stakes or the risk in the business, as there might be other better opportunities where he can invest and then of course earn much better as compared to investing in his own business. So this was the drawback. Now this was all about option number 1. Now we will be moving towards option number 2. That is, on the other hand, bank loan has to be repaid with yearly interest. So this was the drawback, that it has to be, there will be an increased expense yearly. However, what would be the benefit? Carlos would have 2 years to repay the loan, so the business won't stay in debt for a very long time, right? So this doesn't seem to me a very big problem. Moreover, this will also allow him to plan better for future cash flows, right, as we discussed. Therefore, now this was for how many marks have we covered so far? We have discussed the advantage and disadvantage of option 1 and same for the option 2 as well. So we have 4 marks in hand right now. Now lastly, the recommendation. What do I recommend? Therefore, Carlos should opt for the bank loan option, as investing more funds seems too risky right now. Right? In my opinion, I think that he should use the bank loan to improve his bank balance. Right? That is totally up to you if you want to recommend the other option. Now, I exceeded the lines, of course, because I explained more benefits in for option number 1 and more benefits for option number 2 as well. But you just have to write one benefit and one drawback for each of these options, right? Part E. Part E says, state the name of one party other than himself and his employees, himself, Carlos, and his employees, who would be interested in Carlos' financial statements. State one reason for their interest. What are they talking about? They are talking about the interested parties, which are also called the stakeholders of the business. The stakeholders, right? Not just the shareholders. The stakeholders that are directly or indirectly influenced by the actions of the business, which are affected by the business actions. Now, there are many parties which are related to the business. So, there are multiple stakeholders which have an interest in the affairs, in the actions of the business. Firstly, we have the owners or the shareholders, of course. Then we have the employees who have a direct interest in the affairs of the business. Of course, they would want to know whether the business is profitable or not, so that they will have their pays, their wages on time, and whether the business provides security, the job security or not as well, right? But you don't have to write about employees, you have to write about other stakeholders. So in other stakeholders, we will have suppliers to the business, right? Suppliers of the inventory. They would want to know about the business, that whether again it is profitable or not, whether the business will be able to pay for the inventory, for the purchases on credit or not, and about the future purchases as well, whether it is secured or not. Similarly, about banks. Banks are also a stakeholder to the business. They would want to know that if you are taking a loan, and when will you be able to repay it or not, right? What about the interest charges? Will you be able to repay that or not? Or if you are taking a short-term loan, right? That is what a bank overdraft. So what would be the timings of the bank overdraft, and by what time will it be repaid or not? Then we have the government as a stakeholder as well. They would again want to know about the profitability of the business, that whether the business will be able to pay taxes on its profits or not. And there are other stakeholders as well. So you can write about any of these stakeholders for which you have more information, and I will be writing about bank as the stakeholder. So the interested party would be bank, and you also have to write that what interest they would have in the business. Why would they want to know about the business? So you can say that, right, we can say to assess the ability of Carlos' business to pay off the overdraft loans or bank loans or the interest when they fall due. You can write about government as well, that they would want to know about the cash flows, the liquidity, and the profitability of the business as well, that so that they can estimate or they can calculate the amount of corporation tax which is applied on the profits of the business that they will be receiving. So we are done with this part, and we are done with this question as well, right? So this was question number 4, and this is the second last video in this series because we are left with just one question. So I'll see you with that in the next one.